Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Development Services Committee meeting. First up, we're going to do I need a motion on our minutes from last month.
Move to approve minutes.
Motion by Gary, second by Mary. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes. First up, we've got a little snafu in our agenda. So what we're going to do first is we're going to ask the Melissa Self and Kathleen Morton from Community Action to come on up, if you would, and give us an update on the Eviction Prevention Program.
Where's the mouse? Oh, Peter's coming up.
Peter's coming up to help you out.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Morton. I am the Housing Program Manager at Community Action of Skagit County. Thank you so much for inviting us to come and chat with you today. Thank you so much for Mayor and City Council members, as well as Peter, for having us. And thank you for your continued partnership as well.
Sorry to interrupt, but if you don't mind, you could take off your mask. It might
Oh,
be
okay,
better
great.
for us to hear. Thank
It's
you.
been a while since I've done this in person.
It's easier to hear.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So today I'll be talking about one of the programs that I oversee. I oversee a number of programs at Community Action. I oversee our rental assistance program, our family development center, as well as our residential services, support services as well. So today we'll be focusing on eviction prevention. So most folks know Community Action by the services that we provide. Community Action provides tools for families and individuals to take steps towards their goals. Folks can call or walk in to obtain service in order to get their needs met. As you know, the biggest challenge for most families in Skagit County is the skyrocketing cost and the lack of affordable housing. When our neighbors are spending too much on housing, there's not enough for their basic needs. To help meet immediate needs, we provide information, referral, and assistance in applying for programs that can help stretch their income and fill the gaps. In addition, we're trying to change the root causes of poverty, and we appreciate the city's partnership and community change as much as your support with our direct services. Who we serve. As you know, all communities across the U.S. who get funding from HUD must have a coordinated entry system from front door to all homeless service providers to make it easier to navigate the system. Community Action is the contractor that provides that big front door. Really, all of our programs are focusing on the actual solution to homelessness, preventing it in the first place. During the pandemic, while households had little income and housing prices continued to rise, preventing homelessness became even more important. The most vulnerable were disproportionately hit by this pandemic. As you can see, while we serve every community in Skagit County, we serve a higher percentage of Mount Vernon residents than the city's overall share of the population in the county. The yellow bars are the percent of Community Action customers in each jurisdiction. The gray is the percent of each city's population that is living in poverty, and the blue line is each city's percentage of the county's population. It's important to note that the gray is the federal poverty level, a very low and flawed measure of income. The experience of poverty is much higher in Skagit County as housing and other costs outpace incomes. This is why numerous funding sources for eviction prevention have been critical to stabilizing our neighbors in the last 2 years, year and a half. So why does housing stability matter? Without it, our children can't learn. Seniors have worse health impacts, and our community suffers, and we all pay for it. When our neighbors suffer from homelessness, stress, and crisis, we all suffer. Programs such as this make it possible for families to stay in their homes. As you can see, this program consisted of a number of funding sources. We've had the privilege to have great partners such as Skagit County Health Department and the City of Mount Vernon. We've also had the privilege of working with numerous community agencies as well. I would like to give special thanks to Edgar Serrano and Peter Donovan for their partnership with utilizing the CDBG funds. So as you can see, we've had CDBG, TBRA COVID, ERAP 1.0, and TRAP 1.0. Our funding sources constantly change within this program. Since September 2020, we've dispersed about $4.1 million within Skagit County. I would like to emphasize this is only community action. This is not the entire county figure. Community action of Skagit County has served about 476 households throughout Skagit County as a whole. Of those, 231 households were served in Mount Vernon city limits, equaling to $1.3 million dispersed to residents within Mount Vernon city limits. That means those dollars are going back to landlords and property owners within the community. So throughout this past year or so, we've had our challenges. We've also had some really wonderful learning opportunities. We've had to learn how to build this program from the ground up, starting in the summer of 2020. And we didn't always get it right. We had to listen to the feedback that we were hearing from the community about issues with access and their experience interacting with our program and our staff. We even issued surveys in order to determine how we could better improve our performance and service to the community. And because of that, we've been able to serve households within a number of weeks. So from time that they apply for assistance to the time that the landlord actually has check in hand. So it's we've come a long way to make sure that that is a quicker process. I would say the approximate amount of time currently is about 3 to 4 weeks from check in hand to application process. Let's see. So we've had to go back to the drawing table sometimes as we see the need in the community and we have shifting funding sources with different eligibility requirements. So we've really tried to put these pieces together as best as we could. And we've definitely taken some valuable lessons from implementing this program that we can take with us into the future. So how does this compare to what we're doing nationally? The Emergency Rental Assistance Spending and Performance Trends report that was just released November 10th shared a lot of information. It was about 40 pages of information, but I only pulled what I thought would be relevant for you guys here today. So approximately $211 million have been spent with the first round of ERAP funds by Washington State grantees. About 1/5 of grantees have spent about more than 80% of their ERAP 1.0 allocation nationally. So we are performing quite well on a state level. Nationally, what we anticipate in the future is some reallocations to better performing states and some adjustments to states that who did not receive enough assistance. So over the next few months, we will probably start to see that a little bit more.
Can I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know if you're going to answer this anyway, but I just thought, where do we fall into that Washington State? Was that something you're going to talk about? I'm sorry
I
if I'm
wasn't, but
getting
I'm
ahead
really
of you.
happy to talk about it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So at Community Action, we have spent 100% of our ERAP funds, and for the county, we have as well as a whole.
Great.
So we had a contract for TRAP as well, which was about 3 times as much as ERAP, and we have spent about 80% of that, but we are switching to ERAP 2.0.
What does ERAP stand for again?
Emergency Rental Assistance.
Thank you.
Yes.
So many acronyms. It's hard to keep them all straight.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you.
So yes, Skagit County has been performing quite well, and I think that is due to the partnerships that we have in our community. I've had the privilege of partnering with Community to Community, which is a grassroots organization that has really good relationships and rapport with agricultural families in the area. The county has also contracted with Northwest Youth Services and a number of other partner agencies. And I think because of that, that is why we are as successful as we are.
Great.
Great question.
Thanks.
So what can we expect moving forward? So the Skagit County Health Department does lead, is our main grantor when it comes to eviction prevention dollars. They are given that funding by the Department of Commerce, which comes down through the federal government. Our current contract for ERAP 2.0 is until September 30th, 2022. At that point, we are unsure if programs like these are still needed. If so, there is a possibility of reallocations from other counties or potentially even other states down the line. It is really too far in the future for us to make any sort of judgment on that. And we hope to support another 600 households over the next year or so, at a minimum. And we hope that Skagit County as a whole will, if not double that service number as well. And we've implemented tools to process applications as quickly as possible by having online applications. People can come in, and they can also do a lot of things by phone or computer to make it as easy as possible as we recover. All right. Does anybody have any questions?
I have one more.
Absolutely.
Just go ahead and throw it out now.
Yeah.
You said at the beginning that people can come into your office now?
That is correct.
Okay.
So our lobby is open.
Okay.
We do require masks.
Uh-huh.
Our staff are on site. I do personally have some staff that are a hybrid schedule, but most of our staff is on site to assist folks.
And can they just walk in? Do they need to have an appointment?
They do not need to have an appointment.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, let's see here. Next up, first off, I wanted to just take a minute to thank the developers and guests that have come tonight for this briefing. Briefly, in 2017, Burke was retained to assist council and staff with prioritizing pieces of the housing element of our comp plan, specifically addressing our goals, objectives, and policies. In December of that year, Burke provided suggestions to the city regarding affordable housing code. Beginning in 2018, a new council and city staff began planning and implementing pieces of their recommendations. So tonight's presentation is intended to establish an understanding about implementation activity to date and preliminary evidence of its impact on housing production. This will assist council over the next few months to establish our legislative docketing process for 2022 and 23. I would ask that we allow Burke to present their findings and hold our questions until the end. And in an effort to be respectful of everyone's time, we're allowing about an hour, so 7:15 for this piece of our agenda. With that said, I will turn it over to our Development Services Director, Chris Phillips. There you are.
Hi, thanks so much, Councilmember Beaton. So I'm going to steal your first slide. All right, so very fortunate that, we were working with Burke that we were able to get really two superstars within that particular organization. Number one is Dr. Kevin Ramsey, and you can see here, I mean, not only is he a housing expert, but as far as market analysis, assessment, policy development, he's the star player there at Burke. The following month in December, you'll meet Dawn Couch, who again specializes in community development, strategy, social, economic change, and stakeholder engagement. So she'll be here to help with facilitating more of a discussion and helping out with the information that you received a month ago, tonight, and what you'll have as far as read ahead material and where we're going on the December meeting. And then, like I said, she'll be able to facilitate that conversation that we'll be having at that time. Okay, without further ado, we've got Dr. Ramsey.
All right. Should I take this off? All right. Thanks for having me today, everyone. So for a little context, the city has hired Burke Consulting to support the housing work plan update process. And this will be the first meeting. And the purpose of today's meeting is to kind of establish a common understanding of the activities to date that the city has gone through to implement the comprehensive plan housing element from 2016. So we're going to go through some of those activities to date that they've implemented, as well as some of the outcomes of that work. And then we'll have a follow-up meeting again in December, where my colleague Dawn will be visiting, where we'll continue the discussion about prioritizing additional actions to take in advance of the next comprehensive plan update cycle. I wanted to start with a couple definitions, just to, these are probably a review for a lot of you, but just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, because this language is used quite a bit when talking about affordable housing policy. So first, area median income. That is the median income for a family of four in Skagit County. It's calculated by Department of Housing and Urban Development. Currently, it's just over $83,000. That's up from $66,000 around in 2017 when this original work plan was developed. So it has been raising at a pretty quick pace, and that's used to develop the income limits for qualification in affordable housing. So as that goes up, those income limits go up relative to AMI. So it's something to keep in mind, and those are adjusted by household size as well. Housing affordability. So a home's considered affordable if a household pays no more than 30% of its income on housing costs. So for an example, an 80% AMI family of four would have an household income of about $66,500. At this income level, they could afford a rent, monthly rent of about $1,660, which is 30% of their monthly income. So the last definition I wanted to go over is income restricted affordable housing. And this is housing where the rent is regulated to be affordable to a household at a certain income level, for example, 80% of AMI. And those rents are adjusted based on assumed household size. For example, a two-bedroom home at 80% of AMI rents for about $1,500. And that's a fixed rent to be affordable at that particular level. And again, households would need to qualify based on income levels to reside in an income restricted affordable unit. Questions? Okay. This slide shows the typical housing planning cycle that cities in Washington State go through when planning under the Growth Management Act. So you'll see in 2016 was the last time that the city adopted its comprehensive plan, which included a housing element with housing goals, which we'll talk about. And so that kind of ended in 2016. And then in this period, this kind of green period in the middle here, is in between the two comprehensive plan updates. The next one is due in 2024. And right now, between 2017, 2021, the city's been busy implementing a lot of the policies, goals, and objectives that were adopted in the last comprehensive plan based on input from the community, the goals set by the council and the community. In 2017, as was mentioned earlier, Burke was hired to help identify and prioritize code changes that the city could use to implement those goals and policies. Since then, the city has gone through a number of different actions to implement code changes, and we'll talk about some of those today. And then the timeline kind of goes forward to what we could expect in the future, including another study by Burke, which I'll talk about later. 2022, there'll be new population growth and job targets, community visioning, and getting ready for the next comprehensive plan update. These are the goals in the current housing element, which again was adopted in 2016. Briefly, I won't go through these in detail, but the first one really focuses on encouraging housing production and housing diversity to meet the diversity of different housing needs within the city of Mount Vernon. At different ages, different income levels, different backgrounds, right? The second one focuses on preserving and maintaining existing housing in existing neighborhoods. The third focuses on the importance of living wage job retention and creation so that people can afford to live in the community and not need to commute far away to be able to do so. The fourth focuses on affordable housing development, which is integrated throughout different neighborhoods within the city of Mount Vernon. And the fifth one focuses on promoting the development of housing that's tailored to special needs population. So that could include people experiencing homelessness. It could experience people that are transitioning from correctional facilities, different populations that have particular needs that might, need like wraparound services, et cetera. So those were the kind of high-level goals that are in the comprehensive plan. Then there's a series of objectives and policies within the plan as well. Recently, staff with the City of Mount Vernon did a comparison and reviewed the goals, objectives, and policies of the city's housing element against neighboring or different cities within Skagit County, as well as the county housing element. And the finding was that there's strong alignment overall. The same types of goals and policies are in there. They also found that Mount Vernon's goals, objectives, and policies are more detailed and extensive, particularly regarding affordable housing, subsidized housing, and housing for vulnerable populations. So I mentioned earlier, the city created a work plan, which is basically just a kind of a task list of kind of action items to implement the comprehensive plan. And this was created kind of late 2016. And kind of prioritize a list of code amendments necessary to implement the comprehensive plan. And there was a council at the time prioritized actions to help the most vulnerable residents, so specifically homeless and those in needs of subsidized or income-restricted housing. And in 2017, as I mentioned, the city hired Burke to support implementation of amendments to encourage on kind of two different themes within those. So affordable multifamily housing for low-income households, and also small-scale infill development within single and multifamily residential districts. So it's kind of focused on missing middle is a common term used for looking at townhomes, duplexes, backyard cottages, that sort of thing, to try to bring in additional opportunities to live within existing neighborhoods. So this slide looks at the work that Burke did to support that work in 2017. So first we looked at best practice and case study research. We identified communities in Washington State that have implemented density bonuses for income-restricted affordable housing and incentives to encourage infill housing for increased housing diversity. And we documented these best practices and lessons learned for Mount Vernon. We also did stakeholder interviews, 13 of them with different local housing stakeholders representing for-profit housing developers, nonprofit housing developers, affordable housing providers, and social service providers. And finally, we looked at the land capacity data that the city had, and we summarized votable lands data to determine the capacity for housing by different categories of development, such as infill housing or small, medium, or large scale development projects. So we made some recommended code amendments, again, to implement the goals and policies that council adopted with the comprehensive plan. On the income restricted affordable housing side, we adopted a simple density bonus, or we suggested the adoption, of a simple density bonus that incentivizes market rate developers to include income restricted affordable units within those units. So a density bonus is basically you allow a little bit more density, more units on a given acre of land, for example. And in return, the developer includes units that are where the rents are or the cost of the housing is capped for qualified affordable for low-income households. We recommended flexible development regulations to make those projects more feasible, waivers and reductions and exemptions to impact or mitigation or building permit fees, again, to kind of bring down the cost of those types of projects, and expedited permitting, again, to kind of facilitate making those types of projects easier and more feasible to develop. And on the other side, on the infill housing side, our recommendations were to support increased housing diversity by allowing and encouraging the development of missing middle housing types within existing residential zones. And that includes duplexes, accessory dwelling units, which might be a backyard cottage, or it might be a separate entry basement unit or a garage unit or something like that. Or changes to zero lot line to make townhomes and things with zero lot lines more feasible to develop. So basically, attached single family homes. And that includes, we also suggested the inclusion of development standards to ensure that new units integrate gracefully within those existing neighborhoods. So now I'm going to go through some of the actions that the city has taken related to these recommendations, as well as the remainder of the work plan that was developed back following the comp plan, and some of the results of that work to date. So starting, kind of going chronologically, in 2017, the city adopted ordinances to allow for temporary homeless encampments. One example of an outcome here is it allowed a church to house the homeless over a 120-day period in 2017, in 2018, and again in 2019. In 2017, there was also an ordinance enabling permanent supportive housing. So that's housing often for people that have been experiencing homelessness that have wraparound services, to be located in a variety of locations that type of housing would not previously have been allowed. So there is a 70-unit permanent supportive housing that I believe has already broken ground in the city, or very recently. And the facility provides for on-site case management and counseling for people that have in need of those services. And it will be opening in the next year. In 2018, there was an ordinance adopted adopting zoning changes to promote mixed-use infill and additional density in and near downtown. This one, there's been no projects yet, but the city has been getting inquiries and pre-application meetings for future projects on rezoned properties. So there's hopefulness there. In 2019, there was ordinances amending the C4 zoning to provide additional flexibility. One result there, taking advantage of that, there's a 66-unit mixed-use permit submitted in August of this year. And this map here shows where that project is in a image of that, a rendering of that project. In 2019, the city adopted code amendments related to severe weather shelters. One shelter was opened and operated under that provision under this new code last year in 2020. In 2019, the city adopted regulations to encourage affordable housing. So this is a density bonus thing that I was talking about before. So that with this regulation, 33% of bonus units are subsidized housing in perpetuity or income restricted housing. So they must be providing units at that level that is affordable to qualified households. And the total density bonus varies by zone. It's a 50% increase in single family zones and 100% increase in other zones and PUDs. So they've seen with this provision, which is just a couple years old, they've seen at least 34 new income restricted units expected to be provided in 4 different development proposals. So that's in addition to the market rate units that are also provided within those developments. And the following slides, I'll show a couple examples. This one's on 21st Street. Construction's anticipated in the spring. It's a total of 10 multifamily units, and 3 of them would be income restricted. And priorly, it would have prior to code amendments, it would have been 7 units would have been possible.
Mm-hmm.
Another example here is on Taylor Street. Also, the construction is anticipated in 2022. This is a total of 4 multifamily units. 1 of them would be income restricted. And priorly, this only 1 unit would be possible. And with the amendments, it allows for those 4 units. So just a couple more here to go through. Also in 2019, there are code amendments to allow for 0 lot line subdivisions to support duplex and townhome developments. These, again, attached kind of single family homes. There haven't been any projects with that yet, but there have been inquiries about this. And in 2020, there were code amendments to allow for safe parking areas for homeless individuals that are living in their vehicles. There have been none to date. However, one church is actively working with others to get support needed to operate this type of program. And again, these are pretty recent changes. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about residential permit trends in the city, kind of before and kind of during the era where these changes are taking place, just to see, is there any relationship? You can see the dotted black line there is the average annual dwelling units over the past decade. About 138 is the number of permitted dwelling units or housing units each year. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. In 2020, it was somewhat higher. It was 22% higher than the average. The prior years was a little bit lower, but in general, it's pretty much, it looks like the pattern we've seen, some higher, some lower. Haven't seen yet a significant kind of impact positively or negatively. There's also, in terms of this year and next year, they already have some units in the pipeline that have been permitted already. 103 in 2021 and 120 in 2022 expected. Again, there could be more permits coming in. 2021's not over yet. Obviously, 2022 hasn't started. So those numbers can only go up. But the fact that they're already over 100 is showing that there's still healthy interest, or at least comparable to the past decade, in terms of the housing market, housing development within the city. So In terms of the progress to date, we just went over a lot of those actions that the city has done. That's actually a fairly strong list of code changes to take on in that period of time in our experience working with communities around the state. So they have made significant progress on implementing zoning and regulatory updates to support the goals and objectives in the comprehensive plan. And among those are many of the code changes that Burke identified in our 2017 study. There's evidence, again, that developers and service providers are taking advantage of some of these new changes to codes and regulation. But it's also good to keep in mind that it often takes several years for a code change like that to really have its full impact on permanent development activity. As developers become more aware of how to take advantage of new code or just that they exist, right? Or new developers from the area, identifying that there are opportunities in the city of Mount Vernon. So sometimes it can take a time, and we certainly recommend continuing to monitor those trends and see if they're heading in the right direction. This just shows the kind of full list of work plan items from that 2016 work plan, and which ones have already been implemented by the city. Many of those we reviewed earlier, and which ones are still on the list to complete in the years that come. So I won't go through all of these, but obviously there's all but 4 of them have been completed, and there's a few more to go. So in terms of our experience kind of evaluating housing markets and our experience working around the state, the city asked us to kind of comment on where we think the market here in Mount Vernon is going and what can be kind of expected in years to come. We don't see the high demand for housing in Washington leveling out or reducing. And we see it continuing to really put pressure on housing costs in Skagit County and Mount Vernon. I think this problem is going to continue, and continued action by the city will be useful to helping to address housing affordability. There's certainly potential for the increased telework flexibility that is coming as a result of COVID and the changing work practices, making telework much more accessible. I'm entirely telework now myself. This could make Mount Vernon and Skagit County attractive locations for some, Seattle area workers, particularly higher income workers, and that don't need to be commuting to the office each day. And that could further increase demand for housing. There's definitely potential for that, and I think you've probably seen some of that already. So in terms of actions the city can take, that can help address affordability needs for locals, for local workforce, multifamily, missing middle housing types, the types of things that the city has been focused on and the actions we're talking about. We really see these as having the greatest impact on kind of addressing the housing needs of kind of current residents and local workforce. It's also important to know that there'll be kind of more information in the years to come that'll help inform the next round of comprehensive plan updates that the state will be releasing kind of projected housing needs by different affordability or income levels for Skagit County, as well as projected needs for emergency housing, emergency shelters, permanent supportive housing countywide, and that information is going to be available to the city for continued planning and forward-looking work on housing. In terms of next steps that we suggest after kind of reviewing the progress to date, one thing is now that there are finally some new income restrictive units coming from the affordable housing code changes. is to develop the administrative procedures to monitor and enforce those new affordable housing covenants to make sure that those units stay in perpetuity as affordable and available to lower income households. We recommend developing marketing and information materials to help communicate these recent code changes and the development opportunities that they make available to home builders, both those local as well as those that are working in other parts of the state that might not be aware of opportunities in Mount Vernon. And I think that can only help with continuing to get permit applications and increase production. I think the city plans to hold listening sessions with both market rate and affordable housing developers to get feedback on how these code changes are working. If there's any challenges in taking advantage of them. I mentioned earlier that Burke has been hired in a separate project with the city to support a commercial and industrial lands needs study, which I think will really balance out this work on the housing side by helping the city to understand what are its needs to support the type of job growth that it's looking to do, so that there is jobs and housing balance as the city grows. And that study will provide really good information, particularly about how the use of mixed use, allowance for mixed use zoning, how that might affect jobs, housing balance, and capacity for employment. We suggest continue to refine the work plan and identify kind of new housing strategies as needed as they kind of look at these remaining years before the next comp plan update. I already spoke about this a little bit, the land needs analysis study that it will be updating an earlier study that the city did in 2006. And this work will be done next year. Again, the questions that we're trying to answer is there enough buildable land capacity to accommodate anticipated employment growth? And how does allowing mixed use and residential development, particularly within the C2 and C1 zoned areas throughout the city, how does that impact employment growth capacity, tax revenue, and job housing balance, as well as service needs, right, for police and fire and public works or infrastructure, roads, stormwater, et cetera. And what are recommendations that we have for zoning changes to make sure that there is kind of a jobs housing balance and housing needs and employment needs are met in the city. So that's our review of what's gone on to date. I'll open it up to questions from the council or anyone else. A couple, suggested questions are there any questions about the comprehensive plan update or the work plan process that I talked about, or about the new policies and regulations that have been implemented in the last 4 years that we discussed, or about any of the recent development and any kind of emerging trends there?
Anybody have any questions?
This is so not, of course, thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
I know that we've met, I was in the last comp plan, so I've been through this process. I have a problem with calling it affordable housing personally, because affordable is so across the board. Mm-hmm. I really wish that we could figure out another term to use as opposed to affordable, as maybe workforce housing or subsidized housing, or has anybody ever said anything about the word affordable? Because I think it's just such a broad term that it every one of us has a different affordable.
Yeah.
So it's a hard thing to wrap your arms around.
Yeah, that's one reason I started with those definitions, just to really clarify what we mean when we talk about affordable. We try to be really careful in our language when we do these studies. And you're right, affordable, it's all dependent on the income of the person who lives there, right? And different. So when you're doing housing policy and you're trying to target these types of incentives, you're targeting them at for different income groups, and sometimes it's an income group that market rate housing can accommodate. If the code allows for the types of development that meets those needs. So sometimes when people talk about affordable housing, they think, we're talking about subsidized housing projects, right? And that's not always the case. I mentioned income restricted affordable housing as referring to any housing where you need to qualify to occupy it, and the rents are restricted at a certain level. But yeah, there various communities have used different terms to talk about different nuances. They're like attainable housing has been popular in some communities where to kind of refer to making a variety of different housing types attainable to different members of the community. Subsidized, that's a little bit complicated because it depends on if there's a subsidy or if, sometimes it's just rent restricted, but it's not. There's no economic subsidy coming from the city, right? So sometimes that can be a little bit misleading. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think as the city looks to kind of communicate what their goals are here effectively to the community, I think selecting those terms carefully, I think is important. But again, workforce housing, like you mentioned, is another one that's commonly used to kind of talk about that moderate cost housing that the local workforce can afford, but may not need subsidized or income restricted housing.
I'll ask my fellow council members to maybe chew on that a little bit and see if we can think of a different terminology to use.
I'm still probably have a lot of questions about this. It's still confusing for me to understand what exactly is we are moving forward to see how we can provide more housing in Mount Vernon. My questions to you is where we can locate the undocumented families. That's the family mostly we serve here in Mount Vernon, undocumented farm workers families. Where we can locate these families. Because for me still is a very confusing. I just have the only resource as a community worker I am working with families is just housing authority when we send them there. But when we talk about community action, it's a little confusing and very challenging for me to refer a family to come to apply for these services because I don't know exactly where we can locate these families in this presentation you have. Will you please give? But I would appreciate it if you use how can I say in a low level language that I can understand, and the families I are seeing this presentation on TV they can understand more, because using all this language is very confusing and hard to understand.
Yeah.
Will you please, if you have a little bit more in a low level of language for me to understand exactly where we can locate our families in this presentation, what kind of services they can receive, or what kind of housing they can apply. We don't have families here that can make $6,600,000 a year. We have families that make between 25 and 30,000, 35 at the most. And I don't see how we can serve this with these needs we have in the housing, and specifically here in Skagit.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge. A lot of what we're talking about here is longer term planning for housing affordability for a variety of different types of families and households, and what the city can do to allow for the development of housing units by different types of housing developers, some of whom might specialize in housing for the types of households and individuals and families that you're referring to, and how the city can incentivize or can encourage or make it possible to develop that type of housing. But it's a long timeline, right? And we talked a little bit about new housing developments that have been made possible and that are being built now, and some of the low income housing developments hopefully can provide some more units that can be utilized by members of the communities that you're referring to. But yeah, I think it's a challenging problem, and a lot of cities will do needs assessments that really reach out to community members and try to understand what are the barriers that they are facing. Is it just a lack of housing, or is it difficult for them to access available housing because of language barriers, because of fear of sharing their information because they're undocumented, those types of barriers. So that's something that a lot of service providers, I think, spend a lot of time trying to help those families navigate those barriers. And what we do and what we've been supporting the city on is the kind of longer term. How do we make it possible to develop more housing so that there are more opportunities to house people that are facing those needs?
Then my last
Okay.
point is then I in this presentation I heard three terms: affordable housing, subsidized housing, and low income housing. Right? It's three different things.
Yeah, this gets at the earlier question. Affordable housing again is housing that's affordable to the people that live there. And if we're talking about affordable housing for a low income household, we're looking at a certain income level. We talked earlier about an 80% of AMI. So someone who's making, a household that's making $66,000 a year.
Yeah.
That's one type of household that there might be, ways to encourage the development of those. There's also housing that's targeted for much more lower income households as well, and made available to qualified households. That are at the level. So there's different types of housing targeted at different types of families and households. So sometimes one term doesn't work for all of them, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I couldn't agree more. What you're saying, because my definition of affordable housing, my daughter just got married. She can't afford a $500,000 house, obviously. But then, you talk to somebody that goes into a 55 and they just moved in from Seattle and they got marble countertops, $550,000. That's a bargain compared to Seattle. So, and then you go all the way down to an affordable housing for, a low income person. If, you're talking possibly subsidized. So I think that we've done some things that have tried to open the door. Some of it's not going to make the builders. They need to make a profit on some things. That's just the way it is, and we're trying to get it to where we're doing these incentives so that they can get into the lower income families. But at the end of the day, it is their decision whether or not they want to go down that road. And I don't think we're not in the job of building things as far as the city. Now, we have done in our comprehensive plan, we've done things for our fully subsidized housing. We can do that, but that's, again, we're not necessarily building that. That's coming out of a lot of grants and, so I agree with what Mary's saying, that affordable, that is just encompassing a lot of different areas, but yeah, we could work on that. But I don't know, Iris, if that's really going to change what the builders decide to do. I mean, we put the incentives in there to try to hopefully do that. So,
Juan?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I have an additional question. So first, thank you, Dr. Ramsey, for being here with this evening with us. The question that I have draws on two of the slides that you had up there. One of the slides mentioned that the prior code amendments that happened in the past does take some time for things to come to fruition. And in thinking one of those slides, it mentioned that things will come to fruition, and it's just going to take some time to get there from the past code amendments. One of the further slides, though, under future outcomes, you mentioned about the high demand for housing in Washington across the state will likely have an impact on Skagit County, Mount Vernon, and I'm sure other municipalities, right? So the question that I have between those two slides is, knowing that these prior code amendments take time, but also keeping in mind the likely outcomes for the future, that things could get exacerbated because of teleworking and other external factors.
Yep.
Is there a possibility that sort of the changes required from the code amendments will not keep up pace with the future outcomes that you mentioned?
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely a chance that the code amendments passed so far are not sufficient to encourage enough production compared to demand. I think there's I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to housing production, and the code amendments have an effect on that, but we can't predict the future. We can't, there's only so much the city can do with those amendments. And of course, the amendments are trying to balance a number of different goals around housing and community development and land use within the city. But certainly, we're not forecasting that that these code amendments are going to solve the problem for sure.
Then, thank you. Then I guess the follow-up question to that would be, would there, and we can't predict the future like you mentioned, but would there be a way just to ensure that the changes don't take as long because of the possible outcomes in the future that you mentioned, right? Like teleworking and other things like that. Because I think about this, and it feels like if it takes a long time, other external factors could just make the situation worse. So, I mean, would there be a study to sort of figure that out in terms of how, and I guess would it be like making the process smoother or more efficient, so that time period is not as long, right? From when you make a code amendment.
Yeah, like we made some recommendations on how actions that the city can take to continue to kind of get the word out about code changes and the opportunities with those. I agree that continuing to kind of simplify processes for getting development permits through the process are always helpful. There's always improvements. We didn't evaluate what all the city has done with regard to that. I think the key thing is that housing affordability really takes a combination of many different types of strategies. We talked about some of the strategies that are being implemented through these code changes, and those are definitely positive changes that are being used to help increase the housing diversity in the city, as well as starting to make available more affordable units and to help address other service needs. And the city, one reason that the city has hired us is that they're really interested in continuing to look at additional actions that can be taken to continue addressing different needs that aren't being fully addressed yet.
Okay. Thank you for your answer, and thank you for bearing with my long question.
No worries.
Richard, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the process that we're going through, and I think most of my questions are kind of in the slide you haven't shown us yet, which I think means they're more appropriate for the next month's meeting. But to try to fit into the process you're outlining, asking about the comprehensive, the slide before that.
Oh, yeah.
Where we are right now, unless you want to jump into next month's conversation. Questions about the comprehensive plan update timeline or work planning process. So one of the things in your memo in 2017 that's really interesting is the net versus gross density calculation process.
Okay.
And, rightly so, we've been told by staff that that's a very big question because our entire, comprehensive plan is built on a buildable lands analysis using that net density process. But there's a recommendation in that report to look at the gross densities, which would imply bigger densities in different areas and the need to sort of cluster to protect wetlands and sensitive areas and that kind of thing. So fitting into your process here, any questions about the comp plan update timeline and work planning process? That's the kind of thing you got to think about years in advance before a comp plan amendment. So I'd really like to see what the value would be to the city of thinking about that years in advance and how we make a decision about the basis for the next comp plan. Does that make sense? The question that I have?
I guess I missed what's the question part of that?
Yeah. How do you prepare for that?
Okay.
What is the negative of doing that? What is the positive of doing that? What's the workload look like to move to a net density calculation so that we know what the policy considerations are before we decide how to advance on the competency plan update in 2024?
So what type of analysis might be involved in that? What type of there's lots of ways to like you could use that type of calculation. You could update the buildable lands study to understand how that would change capacity in different areas, and would it make some pieces of land more viable for even for redevelopment or something like that. And that type of work can help be informative to what would the impacts of that be on something like development capacity. You could do feasibility studies to understand would it make projects more feasible by allowing for a different style of development in an area like cluster, like you were mentioning, like cluster developments, that sort of thing. There's pro forma work and whatnot that some communities will do to try to understand the impacts of code changes or of the types of incentives like density bonuses and whatnot, and does it effectively encourage the type of outcome that you're looking to promote. There are a number of different pieces of analysis that can help to inform that type of question.
Okay. Well, it would be a
clarifying question, because I think what I would want to know.
Number one, why would a city do something with gross density rather than net density? And if that is a policy decision by the city council, our current comprehensive plan is based on net density. I think the question is, if the council decided to change to using gross density, does that mean that the entire buildable lands analysis and the way that is set up has to be redone? And how much does that cost? That's the question. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's exactly right. But we are required to do a buildable lands analysis every 8 years. Is that right? But it would cost more if you start from scratch than if you're just updating your existing model, I would assume.
And it's not just the buildable lands, it's the entire comprehensive plan, the infrastructure planning,
right.
The transportation planning, it's the entire thing.
Yeah, it's a big question. The mayor's spot on with that. That's why I asked it early.
Yeah, and it's something that it is common for cities to revisit, or counties to kind of revisit their buildable lands at each comprehensive plan cycle. And it's not uncommon to change the methodology for one. If it's depending on how the last study was set up, it might not be that big a deal. It might have a large impact on the outcomes, but it might not be a huge deal in terms of in terms of cost. But I have not reviewed what your buildable lands data looks like. But it's a difference in calculation, which would make some parcels developable or others not, and it could affect the yield of homes and capacity for sure.
Right. What I think if you don't mind, it depends on the council. If you would like Burke to come back at our scheduled time in December to answer that question.
Yeah.
Honestly, we've had this discussion and quite frankly argument for over a decade. It'd be nice to have Burke maybe really outline the benefits one way or another so that council can make a decision before we spend a lot more time on it.
Yeah,
So
and I don't
if
want to
that's
ask for
something
any
that can
more
be done.
speculation. I think just kind of putting the question out there, and if enough people are interested in it, just a little more homework, to think about that. But
So it's up to council, but that's something that we could ask Burke to do for us for the December conversation.
Can I ask a question? Please forgive me if this is just a really silly question, but gross versus net. Gross tells you the whole parcel of land. Net tells you what's buildable. Is that correct? Or am I oversimplifying or off the mark completely?
Net typically subtracts out the right-of-way and kind of non-buildable parts of the lot when you're calculating when you're calculating density. Gross looks at the entire.
The whole piece.
Yeah.
So you could have a huge piece of wetland in there that's not buildable, but it's still factored in the whole decision, that whole portion. So I don't understand why that's a good idea, because if it's not buildable, it's not buildable. Why would we say you can put 40 houses here, or I'm just throwing numbers out, but realistically, on this piece of property, on a piece of property this dimension, you could put X amount of houses there. But then then it comes back and says, well, you really can't because there's this big wetlands piece, and you have to remember there's got to be roads in there and all this other stuff. So I don't understand why it would be a smart decision to go to gross versus net. So am I missing something?
Often when you're at gross density, there'll be other limiting factors to the amount of housing units that you can squeeze onto that parcel if there's a large wetland or something like that, because as you say, there's critical areas, ordinances that'll make it so you can't develop the wetland part anyway. And there'll be other development regulations about, right of ways and about, services and other, and dimensional standards and whatnot that, setbacks, everything that, all that can limit, can limit what you can build. So it's actually a somewhat complicated question to if you're trying to account for all of that, and then get to what would an actual achievable density as opposed to the max allowed density be on any given site. So a study that's trying to do that out of the blue without kind of it's harder to kind of run that analysis for the whole city, I guess, because of that. And I think, the challenge would be for us to kind of look at what are those other requirements and are there ways to kind of automate that, looking at a city versus, certainly you can look at a given parcel of land and compare what could be built under current code if it was treated with a net density or gross density. It is a little bit, depending on how the code is, it's harder to do the whole city.
Yeah, because all the land is different. I mean, the land here is not, like I've been told for years, it's not easy land in Mount Vernon. The easy land is gone in Mount Vernon, basically, is what I have been told for years and years and years. So I would think a developer would appreciate knowing, yes, this is exactly how, according, here's the plot of land or whatever, this is how much you can put on this because of the wetlands, and you need to have roads and, you know, those really good things that we like to have in our communities. So I guess to me, I don't understand. I really don't understand why we would want a gross versus net. But so I appreciate, thank you for entertaining my question.
Mary, can I just say, I think I tried to couch it as a question myself.
Oh, no, and
because
that's why I was asking the question back. Is like, I
Yeah.
wanted to understand the concept,
Yeah,
you know,
and if
where.
it's, I'm sorry.
No, you go. I'm
If
sorry.
it's 6 one way, a half a dozen the other,
Mhm.
then you know we drop it and move on,
Mhm.
right? But if there are advantages, or you know, to that, and then I mean I know there were some other recommendations in the report about a TDR program and those kinds of things, so that if you have these extra densities, you can move them around to some place that can accept that density. So, you know, I would look for a professional's advice at a very high level if there's advantages before we would go any further. So I have the same question. I totally do.
So maybe it would be worthy of a conversation to see if this is, something that we would like to do. Richard's got a point. I kind of am more with Mary. But then, if, Jill has indicated that we could have a conversation about it next month. And quite honestly, I wouldn't mind, because it's just a lot. It's a lot to process.
Yes.
So I don't know. How do you guys feel? Would you like to spend half an hour on it next week? I don't even know how much time it would take.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if that's something, would Burke be involved with that, or would that just be development services and us?
I'm gonna ask Burke to be involved, because honestly, Development Services has had the conversation for 10 years, so I'd rather have Burke present it and
Absolutely.
give their outside third-party opinion.
Okay. All right, so it looks like you're coming back on December 15th.
Okay.
We can talk over some of it and how we can get that information.
Okay.
I want to be mindful of the time, and I know we're getting up almost at an hour, but I just kind of wanted to wrap it all up with just my thoughts. It's difficult because I was just recently reading an article in NPR, and it was written by an economist who has indicated that the country is short 2 million houses. And there's 5 L's as to why we're short. And that's a lack of labor, a lack of lumber, a lack of laws, a lack of loans, and a lack of land. Mm-hmm. And when I read that, and I read the whole article, I'm looking at it, and we only have control over the law part and a little bit of the land part, because we can, add density, or, eventually move into the UGA. Mm-hmm. And Gary's right. We don't build houses. We don't move dirt. And so that's the challenge is, well, I'm glad that we're not alone, because there's across the country, but yet trying to work through this is so challenging, for sure. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to make those comments. Anybody else have anything they want to say with respect to this? Okay, Richard, you got 2 minutes.
Okay, I just want to put on the table this idea about I don't know what's in the scope of work here, so this is a conversation, but a comprehensive review of the housing element policies that we've adopted and the sort of level of implementation. So we agreed on goals, objectives, and policies in the housing element. And as you listed, there's a bunch that I think the staff and the team have knocked out of the park. And I think there's another subset that are harder, but we haven't made as much progress on. And I've done my own sort of little heat map of that. Here they all are, and here's the ones we did, and here's the ones we haven't done. And it seems to me that would be a helpful process. What did we say we were going to do? How have we done on that? So it's a little different than what you presented earlier as the housing action plan. We've checked all these off. That was great. But how does that then align back to the major master document, the housing element? And where are the easy things that would actually move us with the most benefit and the least effort to our bigger goals. So I'd ask for the review to sort of look at that if we have staff capacity for that.
I'm just going to say that I honestly don't understand what you're asking because I feel like that's what we're doing here. So I guess I'm going to need more.
Thank
But
you.
you
And maybe Dr. Ramsey does know what I'm asking. I don't know exactly what we're doing right now. I think the way I'm just trying to follow the process that's outlined, and we're talking about the Burke report and how much of that got done, I think. But I think we're trying to implement the housing element of the comprehensive plan. And so my question would be, how much of that have we done, knocked out of the park, no problem? How much of that would be easy to do that we still have in front of us that would be helpful to the system? If that's any clearer at all.
Well, the good news is, Richard, we have several months that this was just our first brush at it, and we can have some open discussions next month and January and February. We've got to pass our legislative work plan in March or end of February.
Well, we want to get it done in a year, so by March, yeah, would be a good idea. The slides that are presented tonight, which actually, that's exactly what the slides did. There's slide 18 has a whole list, can be provided to council. And then there's also this document that we've had out for quite a while on exactly what has been accomplished. So I'm just not sure what other information that you're looking for.
Oh, yeah, well, let me be clearer then. So we have a housing work plan, which you're pointing to now and is on slide 18. We also have a housing element in our comprehensive plan that has many, many policies that we adopted. And the housing work plan does not label and include everything in the policies that we adopted. There's a whole bunch of things in here that aren't in there that we haven't done. So,
Can you give me an example if you're looking at
this group did a great job adopting a 2017 comprehensive plan, but we haven't approached implementing all of it yet.
On your sheet that you've prepared, can you give me an example of one thing that we haven't touched on?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Annual report on housing affordability, adaptively managing policies and development regulations. So using data to adapt those strategies. So that's one of my unanswered questions here is the data dashboard and how we know what's working and what's not working. Or meeting growth targets. We haven't really laid out how we're doing compared to the growth, the housing infrastructure that we need. So I'm happy to share this.
That would be great. I would like to see what you have written down.
Yeah.
If you would share it, I would like to share it with, well, I'd like to see
Yeah,
it.
if you'll just,
Yeah, sure.
Can you email it to us?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
And I appreciate that it's an ongoing conversation. So thank you for that. And
Absolutely.
I'm sorry it took up so much time.
No, it's okay. It's all right. This is good stuff. And we're only 3 minutes over. Holy smokes. Anyway,
That's pretty good.
I think we're good to go for now. This is some stuff that we're going to absorb, and then we're going to pick this back up. We'll have some conversations outside of committee. Kevin, I would like to thank you very much for your presentation tonight. Hopefully you didn't get too lost out there. All right. Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you again very soon.
Sounds good. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank
Thank you. All right. Let's see here. Next up, we're going to have an update on the fully contained cities brief. So council has been hearing from concerned citizens about the county's desire to study impacts of FCCs. So I asked the mayor if she and our principal planner, Rebecca Lowell, could briefly address FCCs.
To be able to take that off.
So Rebecca's going to switch her slides. So the reason why I asked staff to just talk briefly about it is because it is a conversation in the community that's drawn a lot of interest. It is something that is very thinly veiled by a developer proponent of a project called Avalon that has come to the Growth Management Steering Committee probably 5 times. I wanted council to have some basic definitions of what the conversation is, because you will no doubt be approached by both sides to weigh in on the conversation. I know that there are some opponents who would like to have the city council actually take formal, opinion on that and present that to the county commissioners. But as in any responsible leadership, you need to be informed, and you need to be informed of facts and not just what a nice application tells you what you should think. So Rebecca's here to just give you a real quick definitions.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. So as was stated, I am here this evening to discuss at a high level fully contained communities, or what you will hear us call FCCs. So to start with, I wanted to just go over just a broad definition of what are FCCs. And so in their simplest term, it is a development that is designed and constructed by private developers that are comprised of homes and supporting commercial uses that are located outside of cities in unincorporated rural areas. The 2 FCCs that I most commonly think of when people start talking about them would include Redmond Ridge and Issaquah Highlands, which of course are both located in King County. FCCs are authorized by the Growth Management Act. When we talk about RCW 3670A, and we go through our population and employment allocations and all of those processes that I talked to you about yearly, there is one in there, and although we never talk about it because it's not something as a city we would ever need to do, it is something that is authorized should a county wish to authorize a fully contained community. And importantly, FCCs are not currently allowed in Skagit County. So why are FCCs being discussed? Big picture, as the mayor just discussed, Skagit County is processing a comprehensive plan amendment application that is specifically requesting that FCCs be authorized throughout Skagit County. What Skagit County has done is they have docketed, just like we do our docket every year, the county does also. Their docket is done on a different time frame though. I believe theirs is done in July of every year. Ours is done, of course, after January 31st of every year. So the county did docket this application, and they plan on completing an environmental impact statement, or what we call an EIS, to study this request. And when I say this request, I mean whether or not FCC should be authorized throughout the county or not. So this always begs the question of, gosh, this seems like a county issue. Why would we be involved? Why would we care about this? And a little bit of background is important in why we would care. So that background really, so the county is required by law to both coordinate and cooperatively plan for long-term growth with the cities and the towns. And this historically was a big issue. And by a big issue, I mean there was years of infighting, litigation, and animosity between the cities and the counties over how this coordination and this cooperative planning was going to be accommodated. Luckily, in 2002, there was a framework agreement that was put in place. It was actually required to be put in place. It was a result of it put to rest a lot of litigation. And really what this framework agreement does is it outlines the roles and responsibilities regarding the GMA growth issues that we were seeing between the county and the cities. really, a couple other things to touch on with that too is that when we look at the framework agreement, not only does it have our roles and responsibilities, it outlines the process that we're going to use when we allocate our population and employment projections. So I'm sure a few of you remember those slides when we start our comprehensive plan process and we get our numbers from the state and then we split them. 20% goes to the county. We take the 80%, and then of the 80%, it gets further divided out. That agreement outlines how we're going to do that. There's arbitration clauses, how we're going to settle disagreements, those types of things are set out. One of the, what you'll hear and what I have heard too quite a bit of is a lot of the opponents to the FCCs feel strongly that should the county adopt a comprehensive plan amendment to authorize FCCs, that it really is a direct violation of that framework agreement that we all fought so hard to put in place and to make sure that all of the cities and towns have that seat at the table, that we're really, that our voices are heard, because we are supposed to be where that growth is going to occur in the future. So to date, as I stated earlier, FCCs have very deliberately not been authorized. And when I say that, I am going back to the inception of GMA, which of course is in the early 1990s. There were several proposals of folks who wanted to have FCCs. County didn't support it. As the mayor stated, the group that is currently bringing forth the FCC proposal has tried for years to get this pushed forward. They've applied many different tacks to get that done. And this is just the latest in a line of ways to push this type of an idea forward. And in addition, in 2016, when our comp plans were updated, that report I was talking about, the initial report that was actually done by Burke, which is interesting that they were here this evening, that took the overall number and then it split it out, the 80-20, and it talked about that process that is really the foundational document for not only Mount Vernon's comp plan, but for Skagit counties and every other city and town. That report that is adopted in our comp plan, I don't know if the other the county or cities adopted it, we did for sure. It specifically states that FCCs would not be authorized. So it really, it is something that as the planners group who made that recommendation, we were fully aware that this could be an issue in the future. And we very clearly wanted to make sure that it was known that it was not something that we wanted to support or we didn't think should be supported in the future. Couple other just items with regard to the FCCs. Really, and just because I'm sure you're hearing these things. You know, why is this a city issue? Why would we care? No matter where one is put, it's going to have impacts on surrounding rural lands. We have areas, you know, in the county right now that we can see, even as they're developed. Of course, they're impacting the surrounding resource lands. And last but not least, and this is something that I've alluded to actually in prior presentations through this summer to City Council, because as a planner and somebody who works in this area, it has been particularly frustrating to me to have this FCC be touted as a housing affordability tool, which, I mean, of course, I could talk to you for hours about how and why that is absolutely ridiculous and would never, isn't going to work. Really, our urban development is intended to be in our cities, and as planning staff, of course, we feel very strongly that that's where that should be. So, next steps. Recommended next steps. I mean, of course, there could be others, but as staff, really would I think we should be just ready with current and accurate data. As we're moving, we're not very far away from getting new population projections for our new comp plan update. So really being ready, looking at our buildable lands information, having that accurate data ready to go should it be necessary, I think will be important. Ensuring that the environmental impact statement process that the county intends on moving through really does represent the city's best interests. That would, in my mind, just involve making sure that we're involved in the scoping process and just actively engaged with the county as they move through that. And of course, as always, it's kind of a given, but making sure that we're keeping the mayor and city council just apprised of what's happening as the county moves through that process. So, and with that, I am happy to answer any questions you might have.
Not to get into the weeds too much, but do they use like the cities nearby, like sewer systems and all that, or are they self-contained and build their own, or how is that?
It could be a mix.
Okay.
So when the I'm going to call it the city of Avalon that had been proposed, which of course was up just to the near the Avalon Golf Course to the north of Kelleher Road. What the developers at that point in time were looking at having the city of Burlington extend sanitary sewer service, which the city does to other areas. I know all of you know this, but it's interesting if you think about like the Skagit Golf and Country Club up in Bayview Ridge. That's not part of the city of Burlington. A lot of people actually think it is. It's, I know, like I said, I know you guys know that, but the city of Burlington does provide sanitary sewer out there. They charge a lot more for it, and so it makes them a little bit of money, which could be an incentive for the city of Burlington if they wanted to. I mean, that would be a choice they would need to make. They could potentially provide sanitary sewer. Skagit PUD would provide water. And other services, but then of course, in that particular case, Avalon, in my opinion, we would have devastating environmental impacts, transportation impacts. Can you imagine the Cook Road exit? We all know how bad it is now. They're just things that urban development has always been intended to be under the purview of cities and towns. We're equipped to deal with it. Those are the types of things we process. We do permits. And suddenly when you're handing that kind of development over to a county, there's just a high potential for a lot of issues.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have one, I think. So you said the 2002 framework agreement, I think you said it explicitly disallows FCCs.
The framework agreement does not, but the county's comprehensive plan does not authorize FCCs, and it would need to. It really,
Right.
It's the unfortunate, in my view, the approach the county is taking is this piecemeal approach, and I've thought about it recently because it has seemed a little odd to me. When you listen to presentations from their staff, they'll say, we had this application submitted and it included a comprehensive plan amendment and proposed development regulations. But hold on, all we're doing is we're looking at the comprehensive plan piece of it right now. They've separated out the development regulation part of it. The problem with that approach is that, as you know, once you adopt a comprehensive plan amendment, we are required by law to implement that. And that's, and I've thought the same thing, so I can see why others are concerned with saying, wait a minute, is the county trying to circumvent the framework agreement? Because if they were to adopt a comp plan amendment that said they were going to authorize FCCs, by law, they have to implement it. And would that then, is that a reason that the county, and I don't know the answer to that, that's a legal question. Could the county then turn around to all the cities and say, you don't have a say under the framework agreement because now we're required by law to do this. I don't know the answer to that, but
And then the 80-20 piece, I mean, could they meet that at all with the FCC? Would that be in non-compliance as well? I mean, by almost assuredly?
well, and that's it's interesting is that they end up, if FCCs were authorized by statute, one of the steps they have to take. So if they allow it under their comp plan, then they have to adopt regulations. One of those regulations is that they have to have a population reserve allocated to them. Now, normally, and the tack that's been taken up till this point is that the developers have tried to come to the GMA steering committee, which is in charge of those population allocations. And they have historically turned them down a number of times. So that's why I think a lot of folks who have followed this are particularly interested this time because the county is moving forward with processing the comp plan amendment, given the fact that it would seem that they're well aware that they're going to have issues or they could have issues with the GMA steering committee.
Yeah, where are they going to get that? And are they going to take it from other people in the county? I mean, just a bunch of questions
Absolutely.
that way. I promise my last question. Could you do affordable housing in an FCC through like a planned action ordinance or something? Could you require affordable housing through your rules?
So this is what the state law for FCCs requires affordable housing. And I thought it was really interesting knowing that I was going to talk to you about, and I wasn't going to bring this up, but you guys just had a conversation about affordable housing. Well, affordable housing is when you're not spending more than 30% of your income on housing. Now, whose income are we going to base that on? If we base that on the income that Bill Gates makes, I mean, can you imagine how much he's going to, I mean, and that's why I say it really is a very ridiculous notion to me. The county could, and this would be, if in some scenario they moved forward with this, and they do have to do affordable housing, as a planner, I mean, anytime that's being talked about, I think that's why in our code we are crystal clear what that means. When we say that, we mean that it's for, you're looking at 80% AMI as adjusted through HUD. We go through, it's a very detailed steps so that we're making sure that we are meeting that target population. We're not just providing housing that's a little bit cheaper for folks that honestly may not need it.
Can I just repeat what I heard, just to make sure? And that is that you could run a truck through the state ordinance, but you could at a local level define that very clearly for affordable housing.
Absolutely. Okay. And if that was your intent, boy, if I was your staff, I would say that that's what's necessary, or else, that it's one of those catchphrases that's real easy to throw out there and say, oh yeah, we're for affordable housing, but what exactly do you mean when you say that?
Thank you for your educated answers.
All right. Any other questions on FCCs?
Mm-mm.
All right.
Thank you.
Rebecca, why don't you talk to us now about the shoreline master plan?
And just one slide on this, just because we had our public hearing last night in front of the Planning Commission on this. So I just threw up this slide just to kind of outline the process. I know I've spoken to you about this a number of times through this year, and I believe it was last month I handed you your stack of materials for that as well. I will be putting updated materials in your council drive here soon too. What I did make sure to do is any of the changes that were made after the paper version you were given, are highlighted in yellow. So if you've already gone through and read it, of course you're welcome to read all, 300 or 400 pages of it again. But just so you could quickly identify what had been changed in that. So we've gone through quite a process to date. The Planning Commission, of course, like I said, was last night, and it was passed. Right now, I believe we have as the city council hearing will be scheduled for December 8th. The only reason I don't have the 8th on here is I'm just finishing up confirming with attorneys and others, just triple checking, because we've done a lot of public notices. And so I'm just, before we do one last one to nail down that date, we'll have that there. But it's coming to a close pretty soon. Actually, Councilman Brocksmith was there last night, so I don't know what your thoughts were. I thought the hearing went pretty well and was pretty straightforward.
I was there to listen.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was, we, as I had posted in our part of the public participation, it's always hard. The public participation we get isn't always very robust, especially after, when I counted them up, we've sent out almost 5,000 notices, pieces of mail over this year. And at our hearing that we had a joint hearing with the Planning Commission and the Department of Ecology earlier in the year. We had one person show up, and the poor guy, after he was there for just a little while, realized that he doesn't even live inside the city limits. Okay. So we gave him the information for the county. And nice guy, but anyway, so that'll be really nice to be able to move that one off our plate pretty soon.
Rebecca, on the shoreline master plan, does the state provide cities with, here's our recommendations, and then part of the process we go through is, do we want to make theirs more stricter, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are really, there's definitely guidelines, and there's things that we're allowed to do and things that we're absolutely not allowed to do. And actually, what's really nice from a staff perspective is that we have already received what the DOE calls an initial determination of consistency. Unfortunately, we didn't receive it until I think maybe the first week in November, which is much later than they should have gotten to us, but they got it to us. And so what that tells me as staff, and you too, it's an exhibit that you'll be receiving, is that they have reviewed everything in our shoreline update, and they make a list of required changes and recommended changes. And so the copy of the updated document, that's one set of the changes that you're getting. All of the required changes are already incorporated into the document you'll receive, and there was just 3 or 4 wordsmithing type things that they were requiring. And all of the recommended changes were made as well, except for one. And after talking to staff, they completely understood. It was they recommended we put the entire language of a WAC for the shoreline exemptions into our plan. But we don't issue very many shoreline permits a year, and those exemptions change. And so our reasoning for not doing it, and we feel really strongly, is because I always want to make sure that our staff is looking those up, because there's dollar thresholds in there that do change, and there's just a high chance that we're going to get it wrong if we're not forced to go out and look up the most recent stuff every time. So what's nice is that, DOE has already given us their, initial blessing, move forward. Their staff has been phenomenal, really, honestly, to work with. Actually, the staff person that was initially working with me through the first 9 months, she got moved to something else, but she had seen Mount Vernon in the news and just reached out today just to see how we were doing. She said, "Hey, I saw your planning commission hearing was last night. How did it go?" So they've been really great with helping, and we've had some challenges with things and making sure that what we're doing is correct, is legal, and really recommended by the Department of Ecology. So we've worked really hard to make sure that what we're going to present you meets all those criteria. So,
cool. Thank you. Any other questions? All right.
Councilmember Beaton,
yes.
I was wondering if I could ask the mayor if I could spend a little bit of time with Director Phillips, and if you all want our senior planner to kind of ask a couple of questions about content in the shoreline master plan, so I don't drag everybody else through it if they're not necessary. That's up to you. If I could come and ask a couple of detailed questions, just want to understand a couple things a little bit better.
I don't think there's ever been any restriction. Just talk to Chris and come on in.
Okay, thank you.
All right, with that, we're going to move on to miscellaneous code amendments.
All right, so upcoming code amendments. So as I briefed you a few times, we had 2 distinct sets of code amendments that were coming back before you. Last night I did have we had the floodplain amendments that FEMA is requiring us to do to make sure that we keep our community rating system. Because if we don't, citizens who have flood insurance will be paying more for their premiums. So there's a direct correlation with making sure that when FEMA asks us for changes to our code, that we'd say, yes, we will do it right now. So those were also passed by the Planning Commission last night, and those will be back before City Council on December 1st. I had initially planned on having all the amendments to Title 17 also before you at the same time on December 1st, but frankly, we just simply we ran out of time with the shoreline updates, making sure I was incorporating all the things from DOE and some other comments we got. I just didn't have time to really tidy that up. And last night in front of the Planning Commission, that was one of the questions I asked them. I mean, we were almost 2 hours in, and I said, okay, guys, I can power through if you want me to. And they said, no, please don't. Can we please wait till January? I said, hey, fine by me. I'll make sure the council's aware of that. There was nothing that was an emergency by any means with those other sets of code amendments. So we really had some time to do those. So I'd hope that we could get to those in January of next year. And really, I thought just because we had just really touched on them at a really high level last time, I thought maybe I would just mention them again, and I can put the draft. Some of these are, I can put them on your council drive too if you want to look at them again. But as we've discussed before, we've got a handful of amendments to our public district and our parking regulations. Both of those sets of amendments are needed for our new Library Commons project. I think make a lot of sense. In particular, we don't have regulations to authorize parking garages. So we need to have those. And we've worked with the engineer that's working on our project, has looked at those, and we've looked at what other communities do, and shouldn't be pretty straightforward code amendments there. We've got amendments to our sign code that would allow freestanding signs, and a freestanding sign is just a sign that's not attached to a wall. A lot of people call them pole signs, to be increased from 20 feet to 30 feet in height for RV parks. And there's just one RV park, of course, that wants to do that. But that one RV park happens to be located, as you're aware, near Freeway Drive and College Way, and having a sign height of 30 feet is very much in line with what the other commercial areas surrounding it are allowed. So as staff, we didn't have heartburn about that. We had clarifying language in our downtown districts to clarify our setbacks, lot coverage, and building height. And that's just a result of questions that have been asked, especially at pre-apps when people come in. Right now I've got the code set up so you're referencing back and forth to other sections of the code. And really the feedback has been that it's a little confusing, and wouldn't it be nicer just to have it right in that code? So I said, fine, that makes sense, easy enough to do. And then this was the last one, and this was really the one, I think last time too, that we were really, I really wanted the council to really think about, because this was the one that, oh, actually, hold on, did I miss a slide? No, I didn't, sorry. Sorry, it's out of order. So I'm going to start with this one first because I think it'll make more sense. So we had the amendments to the C3 zone. that was to allow the horizontally integrated mixed uses, which I think makes a lot of sense. And the discussion after that really was if we were going to allow that to happen, that the recommendation was that no less than 20% of the overall multifamily units be subsidized units. So there I'm trying to, what I'm qualifying that with is that they're going to use our affordable housing ordinance. They'll be in program set aside for those making 80% of the AMI or less. So as we started to have that conversation, I took another look at our affordable housing or our regulations to encourage affordable housing. Because this was an important, I think a really important discussion, and we've had comments from Councilman Brocksmith at our committee meetings, being concerned that are these regulations creating barriers for market rate developers? Should we decrease that percentage from what's required right now, which would be the 33%, to the 20%? I think we've talked about, I've looked at some of those averages with council, and I've really just kind of laid it back at you to say, this is your policy choice of what you want to do with that. As your staff, I don't have heartburn. I take direction from you. But it just seems that we have spent a lot of time and effort, and we know that we have a lot of affordable housing issues. Do you want to make this? And really, and it was put in there in response to those concerns, because we want to make sure that if there's concerns and I'm doing code amendments, we can fix that right now if there's a desire to do that. So that will be in those sets of code amendments as well. And with that.
So are you asking if we're agreeing with that, or did we already agree to that? Or are we gonna have dialogue?
I hadn't gotten clear direction on that, really. So that's why I was
Wasn't
like,
that a
that was
bidding
really
war?
our.
Wasn't that a bidding war amongst the council? At the end of
Say
it,
it
where
No,
we're
I think
going
that
like
was another one. I was
30,
there
and
that
then
night,
it was
yeah.
22. And I can't remember where we kind of.
So I did raise a question about the rezone process requires 33%, which is a pretty big number compared to all the other affordable density bonus stuff. My memory of that is actually that you came back with a recommendation about consistency across the entire affordable housing program. And I didn't explicitly ask for this, but I was concerned about getting sort of like double jeopardy, like 33% plus 20%. And so I do appreciate the clarification in that Chapter 17 language that, no, it's, here's the threshold and that's what you're held to. So I don't think I explicitly asked for this. On the other hand, I do support this because a 33% penalty for a rezone seems a little aggressive.
By penalty, do you mean adding affordable housing? Is that what you're telling me? Is that penalty?
Say it one more time.
By penalty, are you saying that we shouldn't be adding affordable in-program housing? You're now suggesting it just be 20%?
I just tried to clarify that I didn't suggest this, but
I do recall you brought it up.
clarify.
No, I just recall you brought it up, so I'm just trying to understand, because I remember when we passed our code, we were all very clear that it was important to do the 33%, and so
Yeah.
I'm wondering why 2 years later we're looking at going
Yeah,
a
let's
different direction.
clarify with Rebecca. I should say Miss Bradley Lowell
Okay.
to about what this is, because I thought you were saying that this change was just for the rezone 33%, and I don't think anybody's ever said that we ought to change the affordable housing density code per se that says you get 100% density bonus for multifamily, but 33% of those have to be set in program housing, right? So that's not going to change. That's not what this is.
So to clarify, we had
I'm
two different
confused.
council meetings or committee meetings. And Councilman Brocksmith had expressed concerns over requiring when we had, we first started talking about, when we were talking about the horizontally integrated mixed use, requiring that a percentage of that be affordable housing. And I guess I'm going to look to council because this was my recollection in my notes was that very specifically I had written down that he wanted to make sure that our regulations weren't creating barriers for market rate developments. And then we were talking about the rezones came up after that. So as staff, of course, in response, when I have any of my council members, if you guys are raising concerns about something and I'm working in code at that time, I've come back and said, what I said was, if you want to make a change, this is what you could make it to. But again, as I've stated many times, that's a policy choice for all of you to make. Very specifically with regard to the rezones, there's only one circumstance under which you would be looking at the 33% of the affordable housing. And that's if a developer is going from a zoning designation that currently allows no housing units, such as a public district, and then they're asking for something that allows units, correct? So in its existing condition, if you're zoned public, you own a piece of property, you don't get to develop it with any homes. But if the city approves, it's actually a comprehensive plan amendment and then a rezone, so the delta between those, then we're going to look at that 33%. Ordinarily, when we're looking at a rezone, you might be looking at, let's say, somebody who's going from a single-family zone to a multifamily zone. So the change between the two zones is going to be much different than if you're looking at, if you start with 0, and then you're getting 40 dwelling units an acre, and then you're looking at that 33% versus, let's say, if you were allowed 10 dwelling units an acre, and then you're allowed 20. So there's just that one circumstance, which interestingly, we ended up having 2 properties recently that both fell into that category, which is really, seems odd to me. I can't think of any others in the future that would end up doing that. But if the concern was raised, and it clearly was, that wanted to make sure, Councilman Brocksmith wanted to make sure that this wasn't creating a barrier for market rate developers, if the council wanted to reduce that, so it's on that assumption, if you want to reduce it, then I can make a recommendation for you. And that's where we came up with the 20%. But the threshold question is, do you want to reduce it?
And we're only talking about one
circumstance.
One circumstance.
I mean, it could happen in the future,
I
but I can't
misunderstood.
think of many where it would, honestly.
Okay.
So
Richard, I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you were saying.
Yeah, and I'm glad you clarified that, just to make sure I did understand. This is explicit to that one circumstance that's really weird and odd, the 33% that would happen if you go from 0 to 40 units. But we're all in total agreement, and always have been, that 33% of the extra bonus you get actually is only 16.5% of the full development. So that doesn't concern me whatsoever.
So what, just out of curiosity, what particular piece of property does this involve?
So there is the BYK, is it BYK? I don't know, BYK Development, BYK Company. I'm sorry. You know who I'm talking about. They have a piece of property that's located immediately to the north of the old Summer Sun Nursery, to the east of the Summer Sun 1 and 2
The one that went
subdivisions that are there.
From church to.
Then there's a
Okay.
portion of the property, exactly. So
Okay.
historically, I believe it was City Point Church was going to build a church on there, and so it was designated as public. They've now come back and they want to take it from public to multifamily, so you end up with that big change. But I'm wondering from the discussion tonight, if the threshold question is, I'm hearing no, we don't want to change it at all, then it's really easy for me to not look at this at all.
I'll just speak only for me. It was just a miscommunication. I thought we were
Oh,
talking
sure.
about the whole code, and I was like, what?
Oh, yeah.
What did I
no, no,
miss? So,
And your
I don't-
definition of affordable housing is what?
no. I know, seriously, huh? So, in our ordinance, we have set that at 80% of what
Okay.
the average family makes in Skagit County. So first we have to have that number.
Mhm.
The second part of that equation then is that family, and that number moves around depending on family size and other things. We make sure that they're not paying any more than 30% of their income on that housing.
And,
So-
and as, if I'm a developer and I'm hearing that, how would I react to that?
Well, from the slides that you saw from Burke today, and I have to do this off the top of my head, but I believe that for a family of 4, it would mean that if it was a rental unit, that they would be paying no more than $1,600
it's like 1633.
$67
And there's another 1,500.
So,
on
I mean,
housing. So it really, other people, that when you hear the term workforce housing,
yes.
it's very synonymous with that. So, because really, think about how much you pay on your mortgage and
Mhm.
in relationship to that. We've set it up at that 80% level. In coming years, we could set it lower than that, but right now, to start with, we set it at that 80%, which is a lot of our community members. I think
It
it's
captured more, as I recall.
pardon?
It captured more, as I recall. That was
It
part of
does,
the
because it
conversation.
can be lower, as
Right.
well, but that's the minimum threshold is that 80% AMI.
Okay, so if we are at 33, and you're telling us to kind of possibly look at 20, if that was what was brought up, is it going to incentivize them at 33, or is it going to incentivize them at 20? And Iris, you're talking about you want some of this housing, right? But so you're looking at
But
33%.
Taxes-
They might say no. It's
But,
not going to pencil out for me,
just-
so I'm not going to do it.
Just what
Where
just what Rebecca
20%,
said right now.
you might get your housing.
Just what Rebecca said, for affordable housing is you don't have to pay more than 30% from your income. On my case, I don't
I'm
have
sorry,
children.
I can't
I wouldn't
hear
be
what-
able. I wouldn't be able to buy a house or have a house payment. That's something like that. It is. When you said it is we don't. To be in affordable housing is to pay not 30% of your income for a payment.
Exactly.
If that was my case right now at this moment, I wouldn't be able to have a house or afford a house. Never, never. Then just talking about just seeing myself and what we can expect for other people don't have a stable income, then don't have the opportunity to have a roof above. Because it is very complicated.
And I would also say that, so let's say that a property, to talk about it in round numbers, let's say a property you were allowed to have 100 units. And then you opt into the program and you get 200 units because you get a 100% increase. It's the extra 100 units. 33 of those would have to be subsidized housing, and the other 67 are market rate. So that is the incentive for the developer to say, I get 2 market
more
rate
units.
and then 1 subsidized unit if I opt into this program, versus just doing whatever I want with the 100 units. You could you don't have to opt into our program. If you choose not to, you're only going to get the 100 units. No subsidized housing is required. We're not going to do anything. But if you opt in, which is why it's important to have that bonus be significant, and to also make sure we're not diluting that incentive with doing other things in our code, because we want developers to use that if we want to create those subsidized units.
Okay.
For the multifamily, for single family, it's a 50% increase. So same concept.
Half the amount for single family.
Okay. Clear as mud, everyone?
I hope that didn't confuse too much. I thought this is a very, very narrow recommendation from you, and I think it still is.
Well, but I guess I wanted to be very clear, which is why I wanted to bring it up
Yeah.
tonight, is that the only reason I was making the recommendation was because concerns were raised. And the threshold issue, I don't have to make a recommendation if the council is fine with the 33% in that circumstance. We don't have to change anything. I can just take this code amendment and it's not something that has to be decided tonight. I think over the last few meetings, this is I just said, think about it. I'm giving you information about it. But we're going to come to that point probably sometime in January where we're going to say, okay. So the amendment itself is written, and so it's easy for me to take it out should you want to. But just knowing yes or no. I mean, is it something that you want to amend or not?
So for me personally, I was just unclear. Now that I understand that where it is and it's one particular piece of property, Gary brings up a very good point. Wouldn't we at least, I mean, if they're looking at 33%, they may not take that. And so then we get no in-program, whereas 20% at least we get some in-program. I just don't want the 33% on that particular plot of land to be the decision why we don't get any.
Sure, and I guess I would say what's nice about that in a way, though, is that it's conditioned on the rezone. So you're going to have no development potential in that case versus if you do a rezone, this is your requirement. So it makes that decision a little bit easier in a way.
Coming off a public.
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, what put me over the top was if we're, we have this sort of zoning, the comprehensive plan designations, and we have a zoning map, right? And those things don't always align. But our long-term vision is the comprehensive plan, right? And if there's something that is a C2 in a zoning, so take the Chenoweth property that we talked about for horizontal use. It's zoned a C2, but its long-term vision is a C3. And so that means, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, our goal is to have it developed as a C3. That's what's going to fit into commercial, neighborhood, mixed use, whatever. And so we want, I think, people to rezone to the comprehensive plan designation. Again, correct me if I've got this wrong. And so it shouldn't be a heavy penalty to zone to what our vision is. We want people to rezone. So we should incentivize that so that the big redevelopments look like that vision. Do you agree with that? Do I have that right? Or did I confuse you?
Well, I guess a few things in that question. I would never characterize requiring somebody to provide housing for those at 80% AMI and below as being a penalty.
Okay.
And I think it's really, I guess it just
I could be.
if you're asking my opinion, I think that's it's not I think Councilman Holtz really responded very well to this a couple meetings ago when he talked about, the public benefit and our need for subsidized housing, especially when we look at what our community, our income profile, and what we have here. It's something that is so needed and so necessary. And when we've set that threshold at just 80% AMI, it seems very palatable.
Yeah, so I'll try not to use the word penalty anymore. It's easy to understand what I mean when I say it. It's sort of what the implication of doing it, but I'll stop using that word.
Sure.
Good dialogue.
Okay. Keep me honest with my words, sorry.
All right. Having said that, do we have anything for the good of the order? No? All right. With that, then we will be adjourned at 8:10.
All right. Thank you.